Hello everyone, it's the African Esquire coming with a new video. So today I want to talk about something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, but I just needed, I guess, more inspiration. But now I actually feel like this is something I'm ready to address. And that is the question, can you be Pan-Africanist or pro-Black and be a Christian? And I wanted to address this because I've seen a lot of different videos, um, you know, of people dissecting whether or not you could be both. I've seen a lot of comments on YouTube that says if you can't be a Christian and be for Black people, or since you know that this comes from the slave master, you can't do both. I've seen a lot of Facebook memes, of Facebook posts, and Facebook groups and Facebook pages that also say this, and so this is something that I feel like I'm actually ready to address because I am someone who I consider myself a Pan-Africanist, a Black nationalist, but I am also 100% a Christian. Now, this video is not meant to convert anyone or to convince you that you have to agree with me, because honestly, you can believe what you want. And ultimately, I'm always going to call for Black unity. And the premise behind Black unity is that regardless of what you think and what you believe, that we should be able to come together whenever it comes to a Black agenda. And if you want to go separate when it comes to things like religion or ideologies, that's fine. But whenever we're talking about things that move us, our people, together as a collective unit, then we're going to come together for that. So I don't intend on convincing anyone that what I'm saying is true. I'm perfectly fine with people who don't agree with my faith. That's the thing that I think we really lack in the Black community. We have a genuine issue when someone doesn't agree with us. And frankly, you should be able to walk out whatever belief you have without anyone judging you just because, we're talking about Black stuff here, so we all have to be on the same page. No, we don't. You can be pro-Black and a feminist. Just don't expect me or expect someone else to subscribe to that. You can be a pro-Black Republican. Don't expect for someone else to subscribe to your ideology in order for you to work with them. And so along those lines, I also want to say a quote from someone who actually is my number one. I would say I definitely follow in the school of his thought, Malcolm X. Malcolm is a Muslim. And, that has never deterred me as a Christian from following and listening to him and just really following a lot of his footsteps and thinking that he was the greatest Black American, in my personal opinion, to ever exist. But anyways, one thing that Malcolm said, this is his famous ballot or bullet speech. He said, "It's time for us to submerge our differences and realize that it is best for us to see that we have the same problem, a common problem, a problem that will make you catch hell whether you're a Baptist, a Methodist, a Muslim, or a nationalist, whether you're educated or illiterate, whether you live on the boulevard or in the alley, you're going to catch hell just like I am." So this is Malcolm talking and saying that, listen, y'all can be Christian, I'm Muslim, I'm going to practice my faith the way I want to practice it. You practice your faith the way you want to. We're not going to come here to argue about religion. I'm going to hold my religion dear to me, but at the same time, when I'm here talking about Black people, I'm talking about us as a unit, not just us inside of our different factions. So this video isn't, like I said, it's not to convince anyone anything, but it's more so to provide those who have a genuine question, how can you, knowing that this faith came to your people from the slave master or from colonizers, how can you honestly practice this faith? If you have a genuine question about that, this is me giving you a genuine answer. In addition, for those who maybe you are a Christian, but you feel like you are pro-Black, but you feel like you have a conflict in trying to be both, this is just something to ensure you, being a Christian does not mean that you're being, the white man's puppet or whatever, depending on how you practice your faith. So I'm exploring some things about Christianity. And again, this is just to enlighten people who might genuinely wonder how I could be both. One thing that a lot of people don't understand, I hear a lot of people say Jesus Christ is the white man's God. And to say that, I think you have to talk about what Jesus you're talking about. So there's Jesus in the Bible, and I call him white Jesus because usually whenever you go into certain churches, you go into look at certain imaging that's supposed to be Jesus, you'll see a white man with long blonde or brown curly hair, so a lot of times straight hair and blue eyes. That is white Jesus. However, if you know the origins of the people in the Bible, you know that number one, and I'm not going to call him Jesus anymore. I'm going to call him by his correct name. His name is Yeshua. A lot of people, a lot of people only call him Jesus because that's what they've been taught. But that's actually a European way of saying Jesus. It's his real name, which is Yeshua. So you have white Jesus, and then you have the real one, who is Yeshua. And Yeshua was not European at all. When you understand that, number one, he was Hebrew. And people who are Hebrew are actually African people. Now, am I saying that they don't have any Arab ancestry in them? No, but I'm saying in the way that we categorize Black people mostly, if you're heavily mixed with African, we will call you African. We'll call you Black. So, Malcolm X, for example, he was a quarter white, because his grandmother his mother is a child of a a guy who raped his grandmother. So he's technically a quarter white, but we don't call him white. We call him African, or we call him Black, because in our culture, if you're heavily mixed with African, we call you African. If we're going by those same standards, then we have to know and acknowledge that the Hebrews in the Bible were African. So here's a book that I read. It's called The Black Presence in the Bible. It was actually given to me by my mother, and the book really explores the origin of people in the Bible, explicit Black people and implicit Black people. And so when you learn about the Hebrews, you learn implicitly and explicitly that they were actually African people. So number one, if you know anything about Jewish or Christian beliefs, you know that the belief is that this all started, as far as Christian faith, when Abraham had a covenant with God. Abraham, if you look at his history, was likely an African person. Why? Because Abraham originated from a territory called Ur, and at the time that he inhabited that territory, it was mostly occupied by African people. So implicitly, Abraham was African. Not only that, though, when you go through the different histories of people in Israel. So most of you probably know the story that the Hebrews were taken into, they left and went to Egypt. They were living there on their free will for a number of years, and eventually they became slaves and then exited Egypt. During the time where they were in Egypt, I believe it was about 400 of them went to Egypt, and their numbers increased to the thousands. I forget the exact number, but very high, and within a short period of time. And the author of the book says that the only possible way that you can increase from 400 to being in the hundreds of thousands of people is if you're heavily mixed with Egyptians. And we see that this is true because if you read the Bible, you know that, so Israel is 12 tribes. And of the 12 tribes, there's also Ephraim and Manasseh, who are, I believe, they're the sons of, not Joshua, I forget his name, but Ephraim and Manasseh. So Ephraim and Manasseh, both, in the Bible it says their mother was an Egyptian woman. So they're one example of people they went to Egypt and they were heavily mixed with the Egyptian people when they left. On top of that, the author of the book also points out that after the Israelites left Egypt, they were also heavily mixed with the Midianites. So, for example, you should know, if you know the biblical history, that Moses' wife was actually a Midianite woman. So his wife was actually an African woman. And a lot of Israelites heavily mixed with them. So, number one, that's the first thing. The Hebrews are African people. The depictions that we see of the Hebrews, we should understand that that's a whitewash history. That's not the actual true history of those people. Also, Yeshua was an African person. Um, One, because he's Hebrew, but also, and that's implicitly, Yeshua was African, but also explicitly, we know of a number of his ancestors that were African people. For example, Solomon's wife, I believe, if not his mother, was an African woman, and we know that Yeshua comes from that bloodline. So, number one, my concept of Christianity is not this whitewashed concept. I understand that when I read the Bible, that I'm reading about an ancient people, a civilization that was right bordering Egypt. If you look at the map, it was right on the border of Egypt. That is with African people. Now, you might say, well, if that's true, how come when I look at Israel in the news today, it's usually people who look white, or if I go to work and I have a Jewish colleague, these people, they don't look African at all. Well, if you understand history of, so the Hebrews at one point were exiled from Israel. So they were told to leave, and they spread all over the world. And the Babylonians at that time were inhabiting the territory. When they spread, they were also spreading their religion to different sections that they lived in. And one place where they were spreading their religion was Europe. So a lot of people converted to Judaism, and a lot of them were European. So when you hear most people, particularly when people in the United States, when you see them and you meet them, they'll say, well, I'm Jewish. Well, they're of those converts. So they're European Jewish. They're not the descendants of Abraham, but they're the people who have inherited that faith from, different Jewish conversions, So that's one thing to understand. Also, if you understand what happened during World War II, so as everyone knows, European Jews were being heavily persecuted, and whenever the war was over, the United States and other Western powers, they basically said, okay, we have to do something with these people who were being persecuted, so let's just push them into this place called Israel, and let's push the people out, the Palestinians as we know them today. Let's push them out and put these people here. So if you understand that, you know that the people who are in Israel right now, they're not the descendants of Abraham. In fact, there was a study that I read where they did a study of their DNA compared to the Palestinians, and what they found was that the Palestinians were more closely related to the original Hebrews than the current occupants of Israel. So that's just that right there. So the next part I want to go into is there's Christianity with Yeshua versus white Jesus, and that exists apart from colonialism. So a lot of people don't know that Christianity, again, it was in Israel, and it spread to different parts of the world. A lot of people assume that it spread to Europe, and then Europeans came down to Africa. However, Christianity actually spread to Africa before it spread to Europe. So if you go to, and I'm not saying it got to all of Africa, it certainly was not a predominant religion inside of places like West Africa, but particularly in East Africa, there are churches in East Africa that did not come out of colonialism. However, of course, we know that a lot of the churches today that do come out of colonialism inside of West Africa, but particularly in East Africa, when you hear of the Coptic Christians, so places like Egypt, inside of Ethiopia, there are a lot of churches that came there from when Christianity spread to that region, not by colonialism, but by different people taking their faith and going to different parts of Africa. And again, it was driven by Hebrews who were African people, and was not necessarily a conversion between a white man and Africans. Now, of course, I am African American, and I'm trying to stop using that phrase and just understand myself as African. But in this context, you understand I'm African American. I came to America, my ancestors, through the transatlantic slave trade. Most of the transatlantic slave trade, people who were taken from Africa are people who were West African. Therefore, it is more than likely that my, well, first of all, it's 100%, the case that my faith in Christianity came to me from being an African American, a descendant of slaves, and was taught to us by a slave master. Now, to some, that might say, okay, well, I don't want nothing to do with the religion. But for me, what I had to do, the more I learned, the more that I understood. First, while at one point in my life I would say that I was definitely following the white doctrine of Christianity, there's definitely been personal experiences I'm not going to get into right here that, I would not necessarily attribute to that. But the more that I did learn about colonialism and the effect that it did have on my ancestors and people in West Africa today, the more that I had to unlearn a lot of parts of white Christianity, not see Jesus this is just something. Every religion has their own teachings, right? People are not necessarily going to follow those teachings. So the first question is, was the white slave master actually a Christian? In my view, personally, he was not a Christian. In my view, there's nothing in the Bible that would justify enslaving people, raping people, exploiting people, the horrible things that have happened. In my view, there's nothing that justifies that. And I understand that a lot of us have seen these scriptures in the Bible that were taken by the white man and used to justify what he did. But if you understand the original context of those scriptures, you understand that it was someone taking something and making it into something that they wanted to say. Now, I'm not saying you have to agree with that. You don't have to accept that. What I'm saying is understand that there's difference between when people interpret religion. So to go back to Islam, for example, a lot of Muslims will say that the issues between the Shiites and the Sunni, or the fighting, the terroristic bombs and all those things that are happening, that has nothing to do with Islam. So what you have is imperfect human beings taking their holy word and practicing it inside of ways that do not actually represent that faith. So when I understand what happened in slavery, I don't consider those people Christian. In fact, I personally don't think, and this is not, I don't like to judge people, but I'm almost 100% sure that Yeshua does not consider his people Christian, because you can't just say you're Christian and then go off killing, murdering, and raping people, things that are going completely against the words of Yeshua. So the last takeaway that I just want is, regardless of if you're a Christian or not, and if you agree or not, again, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do whenever we come together and we talk about issues pertaining to things that we're facing in the Black community. Because at the end of the day, if you're, as Malcolm said, if you're a Black Muslim, if you're a Black Buddhist, if you're a Black, if you follow the ancient West African religions, it doesn't matter what religion you are, we all face the same enemy. So hopefully the conversation could be that even if you don't agree with me and if you think everything I said was BS, that's completely fine. But whenever we come to talk about things about moving our people forward, you don't need me to agree with you, and I don't need you to agree with me. And I think if we all have that respect of each other, respect of each other's, being allowed to actually have your own convictions and not be the same or uniform to all of us. But as long as when you come together with us, you're on unity, you're not on division, you're on pushing us forward, then I think that there should be nothing that stops us from working together and going towards a common goal, and that is the empowerment of the Black community. So I'd be interested to see your comments. I'm sure a lot of people will not agree with me, which is fine. I'm fine with people not agreeing with me. I'm fine with people not agreeing with my faith. But this is something that I really wanted to address, because a lot of people, I feel like, almost try to guilt you if you do want to be a Christian and Black. And, I don't follow, again, white Christianity. The one that I follow is what it really was, what originated in that region, which is bordering Egypt, from people who are African. So yeah, I would love to see your comments, and I'll talk to you later.